LLMs are powerful, but once you start using them seriously, your conversations can get messy. Your prompts will get longer, your context gets polluted, and you start copy pasting things over and over. What if instead of rewriting them every time again, you could package them into something reusable? This is where skills come in, a lightweight approach to turn repeatable workflows into a modular and reusable component inside your agent. Let's have a look. Hi everyone, welcome to Technology Explorations at Data Minded. In this series, we give you an initial look into new or interesting technologies. My name is Johnny, knowledge lead here at Data Minded, and today we'll have a look at skills, something that you can use to let your AI agent be more efficient and more reusable. For this topic, I've invited one of our experts, Jesus. Welcome, Jesus. How are you doing today? All good?
All good, all good.
Before we get started, maybe a quick introduction about yourself. What's your role and how are you working with AI day to day?
Yes, so I am Jesus. I've been in data minded for over a year and a half, and I am working a lot creating AI use cases, let's say. But at the same time, I've loved to use every new shiny AI tool to improve my workflow. For better or worse, that's what I've been doing.
Okay, and so today you're going to show us how to build skills.
Yes, great. So we are gonna use Claude because they are the ones that created the skill spec, even though now it's open source. But in my day to day, I use Claude Code. I feel that is the most advanced, software at the moment for this, but it might change quickly in the future. And I have created a couple of skills, really, really small skills. One that is to explain code. So every time that you open it, you say, hey, explain me this particular code, and it's going to do a few things to look at what you want from the repo, and then it's going to give you a nice report so you understand it better. And I have another one that is quite handy for engineers, which is to explain a PR. So for example, imagine that you open a branch, you make a few changes, and then you want to craft a good pull request. And then you can use this skill to make this process faster for you. And then you can manually check whether the description makes sense or not, but you don't have to type everything.
Okay, so it gives you a review of your pull request before you get the human review.
Indeed. So what I want to do is first show, it's going to be a bit meta, but I want to use the explain code skill to explain the review skill to see what we get as an output. So because I have installed the skills in my repository, when I put slash, I have a bunch of skills. And here you see in the autocomplete this explain code. So this is the one that I will put in the repo. So then I toggle and I say, okay, hi, I want you to explain to me the PR review skill in this repo.
Okay, so the repository contains already the code for a skill, and now you're asking it to explain it.
Yes. So you see, like I will start by finding the code. Of course, you cannot review something that you don't see. So it's gonna find the code. Also, quite interesting because it's Claude. I didn't have to even point to the proper folder. Like based on this abstract description or not super fine-grained description, is gonna find the skill. Once that it finds, it's gonna try to understand the code in a way that is high level. It throws the explanation. And because the way that the explain code has been created, it gives it in a way that is quite educational. Let's say that you have drawings and you have like you see an analogy. So the PR review skill is a train code inspector. Here is how the skill looks like, which is a visual description. And then this is quite nice. So it's like the workflows. You type review PR and the number of your PR, and this is what happens. We are gonna use a Subagent that is gonna check the diffs of your current branch. It's gonna read the files and then it's gonna give you a review. And then you see here that it's gonna trace exactly one by one what's going on when you run this. Finally, but this is more of an advanced topic, there is an argument that we put for the skill that says that you can only trigger the PR review skill when you call it yourself. Because for example, if you are talking in a conversation and then you say, hey, I want to review this and that, Claude might think, oh, I need to trigger this skill, but it's not needed. You only trigger it yourself when you want to. And that's like a metadata that you can change.
Yeah, so it's basically who is in control. Either the human can call it directly with the slash command as you showed, or the agent can decide to invoke the skill itself without having an explicit mention of the user.
Indeed. And in this case, because we want to avoid like false positives, we only allow the human to call it.
Okay, cool.
For example, the explain code is not the same. The explain code can be called every time you say, hey, I don't understand fully this part of the code, it should trigger this particular skill for
I
you.
see. Okay. So as a skill designer, you're a bit in control of how it gets called. I also see other more advanced things there like fork, agents, and allow tools. These are more advanced topics to design your skill around.
Yeah, basically, this a bit more difficult topic, but the idea is that we don't want to pollute the main conversation. So what we do in this skill is that we're going to spin up a fresh sub agent with fresh context, different tools that is just going to do the PR review. When the review is done, then it's going to feed back the information to the main agent. So then you can read only the summary of the review and not the whole process of finding the files and doing the diffs and these things. Like you don't need to care about that.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is a really nice demo already that your skill is already working to show what another skill does. And maybe you can explain a bit like what is this skill now?
I think that skills are really important because nowadays we have moved from plain LLMs, let's say models that are like chatbot, you ask a question and they give you an answer, to agents. And agents is a hype word lately, but just means that you have an LLM that works in a loop, like you have a function that you want to optimize, for example, gives you the best answer, and then you're going to try to loop for a while to give the best answer. That's really nice, but the problem is that the more loops that you do, the more chances that you are going to pollute the context window of the LLM. Like you're going to put too many details that are not important. So the LLM is going to get lost, let's say, like humans. If I give you too many details, you're going to get lost.
Is this basically what we then see when an LLM is thinking in the UI? It's basically going in a loop and keeps generating out.
Exactly. So LLMs, they have been trained now in a way to reason. So they go step by step thinking about the problem. That's the thinking. And then they act. So then they say, now I need to find the files, for example. I need to read the files. So then that's what you are going to see, which is the LLM interacting with the environment.
And is this a consequence of what was previously the chain of thought principle, where you basically say you have to do everything step by step?
Indeed. So basically what they have done, which is quite smart, is that they have, let's say, baked this concept into the LLMs. The providers, they have fine-tuned the models to actually mimic that chain of thought out of the box.
Okay.
So because of that, that is super powerful because now you can do really complicated stuff. However, you can pollute the context window. Basically, you have an amount of information that fits in the memory of your agent, let's say. It's quite ample. You have like 250K tokens in a lot of models, which is you can fit books there. However, a few studies have shown that the more that you put, the more chances that the LM is going to do something random, like hallucinate or lose track. So that's why we have moved from this idea of prompt engineering, that was the idea of better prompting the LM, better putting instructions, to context engineering, which basically is the art of putting in this context window only the things that are needed. The instructions that are needed, the files that are needed, the tools that are needed. And then you have a lot of kind of tools. You have drugs, MCPs, and then you have the latest, which is skills. Skills are really powerful because basically for me, I feel that they are this kind of really nice way to make this context engineering efficient, in a way that is efficient, modular, and reusable. It's something that is local. For example, you have MCPs or RAGs. MCPs, you need to call something remotely, so it's not in your control. And RAGs is something that is quite technical. You need to implement a vector database and a few things. However, skills is just markdown files, metadata, a good structure, and then Anthropic or Claude is going to handle the rest for you in the background, let's say.
So basically, the way I understand it is if you have a reusable process that you can explain as text, all the steps and the way you do things, you can put that in a Markdown file and the agents will pick it up whenever it needs it.
Exactly. And also, it's not even the prompt, but also you can add Python scripts, for example, or you can do CLI commands, or you can do whatever. Just are the instructions, and then the agent is going to be able to execute whatever you put. For example, in the PR review, if we go to the definition of the skill, you're going to see that we are going to ask the agent to run a few commands in the CLI to get what have been the latest commits.
And is that then also the difference between the previous commands, where you basically just inject a prompt in your context window? Now you equip it also with the ability to run some things locally.
Exactly. The command is more reusable prompt, let's say, which is super useful, but then skills is a reusable, let's say, function for the agent. That's how I see it. It's like a reusable function. and then is defined by a markdown and extra components.
And I also recall the discovery of these skills is also a bit more lightweight because the agent only pulls them in when needed. And it's
Exactly.
based on the metadata.
So I have an actual example of how that looks. They use this thing that is progressive disclosure, which is quite powerful. So in the beginning of your context window, you have the system prompt. This is something that you don't control, and then you have loaded a bunch of skills. For example, imagine that you have a skill that you have written that is used to read PDFs. Okay. The only thing that you keep there is the metadata. You only keep the name of the skill and when to use it, when to call it. That's the only thing that you need to track at this point in time. Then the message says, hey, I want to fill out this PDF. So then the agent is going to be, hey, the PDF skills is going to be a useful thing to use. So you trigger the PDF skill. You see that is now reading the definition of the skill. Hey, this is the definition. Now, because in the definition says, if this is triggered, you have to use this Python script to read the PDF. And that is what is triggered, you see. And that's what is done in that part.
Yeah, so basically every time it needs more information, it knows this information is there. So it's kind of an index and it fetches new information by running fetch commands or maybe even Python commands to execute things.
Indeed. So this is really good because it's super efficient. It also lives in your computer. You have full control of these. You don't have to go through the internet, MCPs, authentication, like this was the problem with MCPs, that they might be super powerful, but you need to handle a lot of boilerplate that if you are doing things locally, like I need to read a PDF, you don't need to do all of this hassle.
Indeed, indeed. Okay. And so how do I build such a skill myself? Is it a technical thing or is it something anybody can do?
Not at all. I would say that it's quite um, simple. So this is the repo. We have this folder. This is the definition of what we have. As I said, um, we have two skills, the one that is explaining code and the one that is review codes. The first one is the easiest. So every skill needs this skill.md. That's the basic. That's the minimum thing that you need. And here you're going to have two things. You're going to have metadata. You see the name, explain code, and the description. This is what it does. So then the agent knows that they can use this skill when you ask about the codes. That is what is always there with the agent. That's it.
That's basically what the agent always knows about, and it knows about the rest of this file. It's kept there on my disk.
Indeed. Then, for example, this, to be fair, it's you could argue that it's kind of a command, but because it's only prompt, let's say. So it's like, hey, when explaining codes, start with an analogy. You see what I draw a diagram, walk through the codes, and call it a common mistake, for example. If I would be working with a junior engineer, and I want them to be able to catch up and learn, this would be a good way to understand. So this is the bare minimum that you can do with a skill. But then you can get more advanced. For example, in this one, we have a few more interesting things. This is the one that we use to review a PR. So you see that now the front matter is going to be more complicated. Why? Because we have a couple of things. The first one, again, name, description, that's it. We now also get an input. So we are going to get an input into the skill, which is the number of the PR. So then you are going to fetch only things for that particular PR. We are going to do this disable model invocation, which means that only the human can use it. And this is more interesting. So we are going to use context fork, mean that you are not going to run it in the main conversation, but we are going to spin up a new fresh subagent. We are going to use an explore agent that is an agent out of the box from Claude that basically is on to fetch information, do grabs and these kind of things. And finally, and more importantly, because we know what should happen, we can also limit the amount of tools that this agent is going to have. Instead of, hey, have everything that you can have, no, you can only do reads, grabs, and globs, and also use the GitHub CLI to get information about that PR. And then the description is a bit more complicated, but it's basically, review the pull request from these arguments. That is the input. The context, you need to do these commands, like the commands to get the context from the PR. So as I was saying, the subagent is going to be able to do this for you. And then these are like more checklists in this, like how should you do the review? What to look for. And this, the person defining the skill is the one that is in control to say, this is what I want the skill to do. This is what I want the skill to look in the code. Because, for example, for me, I work a lot in using infrastructure as code. So maybe there are some gotchas that I would always like to look for when I'm doing a PR with infrastructure as code. So then I put it there. So I put more fine-tuned, definitions, and then the outputs. hey, I want you that every time that you give me the review, this is the way that I want to have the review. So we have consistency. And this can be as complicated as possible because you can use scripts, for example. You can say, run this script every time that you run the PR, or you can have examples of good PR reviews, and these are things that you would add on top of this folder. So you would not use the same skill.md, but you would create new files and reference them in this skill.md.
Yeah, because I heard you need to keep your files lower than 500 lines. So if you have examples or so, you put them in a subfolder, and here you put like a little local link, dot slash, and then the file name.
Indeed, exactly as Markdown, and that's it. That it's like, if you need to do this, go to that file. That's it. And the models are getting smarter by the day. So that's all that you need to say. They will say, okay, I need to read this, and that's it. And they can get as fancy as possible. But I have a couple of references on how Anthropic, the one that created this spec, what are the advice to do good skills? What are the best practices? What should you look for example?
Yeah, because this is a minimal example. And so
Yeah.
basically, you showed that you have this front matter that controls how the skill is picked up and how it is actually initiated, like the subagent component, and also the permissions on your local drive, like it can execute these commands. These are not possible. And then in the body, you basically say this is how the job to be done needs to be executed. You say these are the steps, these are the commands that you should actually call. And this gives the agent then a way to do everything, but it's not like the mandatory way. It can still hallucinate, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's true. Models can hallucinate. The people developing these models now have this in mind. They are putting a lot of effort into not allowing the models to hallucinate, but it's not an exact science. These are non-deterministic models. My advice in that sense is that the more instructions that you put, the more brittle that the logic is, the more chances that the model is going to hallucinate. So that's why you have these reusable skills. It's like a function, like only keep what is necessary and be as short and clear as possible.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned a few specs. Could you point us to the specs that people can use?
Yes, ones that creating skills are Anthropic. They have released these skills authoring best practices, which is a really, really long but really informative page. So they start with, concise is key, these kind of things,
Yeah.
like why. The example of the PDF, and they give you a good example, a bad example. The bad example is longer, but also is more brittle. Like the concise assumes that Claude knows what a PDF is and how to read them. You don't need to give stupid details like, hey, use this to extract the PDF. That's it. You don't need to tell your life. Here, for example, this is explaining what a PDF is. So this for the agent is like, I don't need to know this at this moment. I just need to know how to read it. That's it.
Yeah.
And then they have more the metadata, and then they have more complicated, more fancier, this kind of progressive disclosure. So you see that in the main skill, they references to other markdown files that then the agent will read if they are necessary. So you don't pollute the context.
And these don't need that front matter. It seems like the front matter is only relevant to your entry point of the skill.
No, indeed, because you manage how these are called through your main skill.md. And then each skill is going to be a folder. So here we have the PDF skill, the basics, you need the skill.md, and then it's free. They are quite lenient into what you can do. I think this forms.md, it's also a reserved kind of file. I've not used it myself, but they have a few tips into how to do it, like don't nest too many folders or not, and these kind of things. And they go through what is a good skill pattern or how to split the information, how to reference. One thing that I've seen recently is that they have done the same, but in a more visual way. So they release this kind of, I don't know, nice PowerPoint, let's say.
It's more of a book almost.
Yeah, indeed. Planning and design. It has a lot of examples. Testing, for example, is an important part of skills. Everything that you do with LLMs, testing is quite difficult because they are non-deterministic. You cannot do 2 plus 2 equal 4 simple unit test. So it's something that you need to pay quite some attention, to be honest. But yeah, they give you good examples on how to. One interesting thing, even though I don't like it too much, is that Anthropic provides you a skill to create skills. It's called the skill creator skill. So you can call it and say, hey, I want to do a skill to do this and that. And then they will trigger the skill creator, and then they will ask you some questions and come up with the best skill using best practice.
But you don't like it?
My experience has not been great, but to start is really good, I would say.
I think I used it at one point where I had a long conversation to let it do something. And then I asked make a skill out of this. And
Yes.
so it ended up with a skill that I could download as a zip. And then I had the same structure you had, but then I could start manipulating that myself. And I thought it was a pretty okay starting point. But that was from a UI perspective. That was using the main Cloud Desktop UI. It was not using Claude Code.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a nice lightweight wrapper, I guess. Like if you point to the best practices and what you have in mind, you can get the same or even better. But it's true that to start, it's a nice way to get like a scaffold, and then you can take a look at it and tweak it however you wish.
Okay, a few questions. What is the relation, according to you, to MCP? When would you use an MCP server to solve or something or to add to your agent, or when would you use a skill?
I think for me, I see the value of MCP every time that you have to interact with an external system, especially when you need authentication. For example, imagine that we have Notion in data magnets and they provide an MCP so you can plug your agent into Notion, but of course you need to give permissions to say, hey, I am Jesus, I have access to Notion. And Notion needs to make sure that you are who you say you are. But apart from that, I would avoid MCPs. MCPs are also things that are quite difficult to create. They are engineering heavy. So if there are MCPs out of the box, that's nice to use. But even nowadays, it's even changing because agents can execute CLI commands. There are integrations that you can do as a skill bypassing this idea where it says, hey, use a CLI of Notion to do stuff. Use a CLI of Obsidian, for example, that is a local node taker. For example, Obsidian, they have an MCP and they also Obsidian also has a CLI. For me, it's a bit of over engineering thing to use MCP when it's local. You have Obsidian locally, you have your Claude Code locally. Just use a skill and say, hey, use these few commands. That's way more efficient.
Yeah. So, do I read this correctly that you see MCP being deprecated in favor of the normal APIs and CLIs, and have that be used by a skill?
Not fully. I think like as a developer, skills, I would always say that is the way to go, unless you really need this kind of more complicated integrations. However, I am working on an end-to-end agent that does a bunch of stuff, and we do need MCP, or at least we need a way to connect two different systems and do proper authentication and keep the connection private in a private network and GW tokens, a lot of engineering stuff that it is needed. But if I am doing my day-to-day work or a hobby project, I will always try to use a skill.
Yeah. So, for personal productivity and automation, you would definitely go to the skill route. Okay. How do you share these skills? You made this skill in a repository, it's just a folder. How can I now use them?
That's a good question. There are two ways. So, for example, if you use Claude Code, they have their own way of versioning skills, sharing skills. So they use this concept of a marketplace. So you can create plugins that are basically a bunch of skills together, for example, or agents, and then you can install them really easily. Another way is, if you clone a repo that they have a skill and you put it on your clots folder. And recently, Vercel came up with a kind of a marketplace because the thing is that skills now was created from Anthropic, but they open source the spec. So now everyone, also if you use Copilot or OpenAI, ChatGPT, whatnot, you can use skills. So that's quite nice. And then here, Vercel came up with this kind of marketplace where you can upload your skills and then people can find them. For example, recently I wanted to create a video and there is this library called Remotion to create videos. So I found these skills and I download it. And here you can see like what are the things that you have. I download it and that's it. And you just start using it and it's quite easy to interact with.
And in your local setup, could you maybe point us to the .cloud folder and show where you installed them?
So it is dot cloud. And here you see, these are the skills. Yeah. But also you can go to your roots if you want skills that are used across projects. There in that folder, you also keep track of the conversations and the subagents and permissions. So it's not only the skills, let's say.
All right, this looks really nice. I think people can try it out themselves if they check out a repository. Anything else you'd like to add, Jesus?
No, just give it a try. I think the barrier to try them is quite low. You don't need to do much engineering, but they can speed up your workflow significantly, or that's how I feel it.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot for explaining. There's many other aspects that we didn't cover, like marketplaces, hooks, and more advanced concepts. We'll cover those in the other video, where you will also showcase a bigger agent that you built also using these skills principles. So thanks a lot for explaining us, Jesus.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.